said I was going to do a separate video collecting my thoughts, and look at me saying I'm going to do a thing and then doing it. It's just that I have so many thoughts and I'm not good at voicing things in the moment. Words are hard. So here we go. I have 3 main points. No prizes for guessing what one of them's going to be. First of all, Garming. Loved him. But I stand by my opinion that the conflict between him and his dad was resolved way too quickly. But I do get that something like that could be nice and cathartic for people who are in a similar situation to Garming, who haven't been able to reconcile with their family members, but at the same time, it needs to be okay to say, you know what, you've been nothing but toxic to me, I'm done. Not that I'm even calling it toxic. It's such a difficult situation. I'm not saying that, but a situation can be toxic even if both individual parties are not. Sometimes people just don't go together, and that's okay to admit. And sometimes somebody can be a bit toxic to somebody else without trying to, while meaning the best, but their influence on this other person has been so bad that it's just not worth it anymore. I'm definitely not saying that that's what this situation was. I just don't think the answer should always be just a sudden resolution, and I think that's just as important to show. It's just as important to show that, okay, this is a difficult situation, it's going to be tough, it can't just be solved immediately, but we can end it on a high note of, okay, let's try. We're going to try to reconcile going forwards, but it's not just going to be that simple straight away. Because, I mean, this was a situation so bad that Garming left home, never spoke to his dad again until we got involved, which I understand this is fictional, but in real life that would be totally out of line. Don't do that. I feel like there were 2 extremes conflicting against each other here. The situation was too bad and it was resolved too quickly. I think it would have been easier to swallow had it been a recent disagreement, maybe. Then I could get on board with it being resolved by the end of Lantern Rite. But it just feels like it was all too much. It was too bad and it was resolved too quickly. Thing is, that is just my perspective, and I know this isn't intended from my perspective, but that doesn't mean I can't have my own perspective. And listen, I know I went hard on him. That is because I get problems people may have with communicating. If he wasn't a parent, I wouldn't have been so harsh, but this is a parent-child dynamic, by which point it's not about you having issues communicating, it's about the way you're treating your child. I'm not saying he's the devil, I'm not saying he was abusive, but he was not a good parent. You can be a good person and not a good parent. Not everyone's gonna be a good parent. You can be a perfectly fine person and a really terrible parent. This was never a commentary on him as a person, but him as a parent. And in that perspective, he was a bit of a twat. You can act like a bit of a twat and not be a bad person. And that's not to say people can't change, it just usually isn't that easy and that quick. And regardless, I did not like how involved we got. It was none of our business. I don't think Iptak is a bad person. I don't think he's irredeemable. I don't think this is a relationship that should have been unsalvageable, but I do think that either the conflict should have been less or the resolution should have been that maybe they're slowly starting to heal. But to have a sudden 180 like that was too much. And you cannot approach the situation like this. This entire story was the perfect example of what not to do with estranged family members. I'm also I am critical of parenting, just naturally. I get frustrated when people are doing a shit job because it's not one person being awkward around another person who are on equal footing. This is a parent and child's dynamic. There's a power imbalance, and so nobody's perfect, but you can't be having communication issues with your child. And I do just want to add that there are parents out there in so many different circumstances who will not be able to communicate in the quote-unquote standard way that would be expected. You know what I mean? Like, they would communicate differently, but generally speaking, in that case, these parents, if they're decent parents, and often that is the case, their child grows up to understand the way that their parent communicates. Does that make sense? So I'm not saying that if you have problems with communication, you can't have kids. That's not what I'm saying. But generally speaking, the child will grow up understanding how to communicate with you. This is not one of those situations. This is not I have, let's say, a disability that affects how I can communicate. This is not what's going on here. And I know me being critical of parenting is something that mummy bloggers would hate me for, because I have no intention of being a parent. But you can be a crap cook and also know when something tastes bad, you know. Because it is clearly a person who doesn't know how to talk to people, and that's fine. But it is something you have to address when you're a parent. If his relationship had broken down with a friend or a sibling, I would not have been so harsh. I would have thought, oh, you don't know how to speak to this person. That's fine, we'll try and help. But when your child is suffering, that's different. And I know holding parents to high standards is a hugely hot take. That's just where I stand. I was mad at him as a parent, not as a person. He was a bit of a twat as a parent, not as a person. But it is different when you have that power imbalance and you are effectively, your child is suffering because you don't know how to talk to them. That is different than not knowing how to talk to a friend or a sibling or a colleague or somebody on like the same standing as you. And I feel like that shouldn't be that controversial to admit, that for all I can be sympathetic towards him for not knowing how to communicate, I can be just as mad because it's directed to his child. And his grown child at that. At this point, he should have thought to himself, okay, this is an issue that I have. I need to find help with this so that my child does not suffer. It is hugely different than friends or siblings or colleagues or that kind of dynamic. Secondly, Jianyun. I felt very conflicted about making Cloud Retainer playable, mainly because I love her as a character. I loved that she would be intimidating on the surface, but clearly loving and nurturing deep down with her interactions with Shenhe and Ganyu and Yao Yao. Before this, I mean, I always loved when she showed up for a scene or two, so I want to be clear that this comes from me loving the character. Absolutely my favourite Adeptus. So I was concerned that one of two things would happen. Either she'd be so good at blending in that talking to her wouldn't feel like talking to Cloud Retainer, we'd lose Cloud Retainer by gaining Jianyun, or she would be exactly the same character but overexposure to her would make her character less enjoyable, because sometimes there are characters that work better when they don't show up too often. But as you could probably tell, I thoroughly enjoyed her character. She was Cloud Retainer and her enjoyability was not diminished, at least to me, so thankfully those concerns are no longer concerns. I love her, I want her. Well done, Hoyo, you convinced me. It worked, I fell for it. I'm still not fond of how they went about it though. But the thing is, I do understand that I'm playing a gacha game and the ultimate goal is to create characters that the average player will probably be attracted to convince us to spend money. And I mean, it worked. Not the money part, because I don't have any, but she's exactly my type. She's a pretty woman with glasses. How else am I supposed to feel? Especially when she adjusted her glasses at me. She knew what she was doing. That was a targeted attack against me personally. It was also very thrilling getting to see Mooncarver and Mountain Shaper. I do think that they also could have potentially been diminished by overexposure. I do think they are those kinds of characters, but that didn't happen either. They were thoroughly enjoyable. I loved their bickering. I hope to see more of them. The reveal of their NPC designs, though, was kind of disappointing. And I understand that technically they can take on any form, so potentially in the future they can make themselves look more extravagant and become playable, but as of now they are NPCs, and not in a way that Baizhu was an NPC for so long, but clearly with a playable design. And if Baizhu is anything to go by, they could still have had playable designs and just not been released for a while. If there was just any inkling that these two would also become playable in the future, like, wouldn't even more people want to pull for Jianyun so they can eventually have the full collection of Adepti? But only having Cloud Retainer does feel less like they're gifting us with more playable Adepti and more not wanting to waste a female character by not giving them boobs for us to lust after. If it was a brand new character, I wouldn't care as much. I mean, I would care because I'm a hypocrite. I'd pull for her because she's a pretty woman with boobs, but doing it with Cloud Retainer feels weird, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. I feel better if Mooncarver and Mountain Shaper were also playable characters with tight and revealing clothing. Let them have boob windows is what I'm saying. We're striving for equality here. Overall, I did thoroughly enjoy all of them. I don't want to only be negative. They're adorable, all three of them, and actually I am now really looking forward to playing her character quest. I'm going to do Navia's first though, but you know, save the more enjoyable one for afterwards. Finally, my third point. Did it feel a bit lackluster to you? First of all, why did we not get Sing Cho? He has a new outfit. Him not being involved, even in just a single scene to show off his new outfit, is strange. I mean, has that ever happened before? Let's think about it. Klee and Kaya showed off their new outfits in the Bottleland summer event with the adorable Hydro Idolans, and Kaya even got to show it off again in his hangout. D-Luke was seen in his new outfit, albeit in a very oddly D-Luke light event, but still, he showed up wearing it. We saw Lisa and Smeru with her new outfits, Keqing and Ningguang had their new outfits in a Lantern Rite cutscene, and Jean and Barbara wore theirs in the Archipelago event, so Sing Cho seen where? Ganyu and Shenhe got to show off their new skins, and Sing Cho's was a Lantern Rite reward, so I don't get it. Either offer it now and give him a scene wearing it, or do it later when you can decide when you can dedicate the time. Because it isn't like it had to be a Lantern Rite reward to be free. 4-star character skins are always free if you get there in time. And it never has to be anything big. We didn't need an entire storyline to justify it, just one scene. That's all. And more to the point, I swear this isn't just me whining that my favourite character didn't show up, although I am whining that my favourite character didn't show up, but Lantern Rite is the one time we Baizhu fans get to reliably see him. He can be treated horribly, he can be kept in the Hoyo basement for far too long, and then just be immediately shoved back in once he's finally released, apparently. But at least he gets to appear during Lantern Rite. So why not this time? I know a lot of characters didn't show up, but Baizhu especially didn't show up. We've just had Chenyu Vale. We have a performance showcasing something from Chenyu Vale that isn't too popular in the era, performed by somebody who not only goes to businesses to try and promote his dance, but also knows Baizhu. Baizhu, who has been mentioned twice through Lantern Rite. The entire thing, was about family and stuff. Who's the one playable character who might actually be able to give some insight on what it's like to be a dad, kind of. I don't get it. Is it just me, or has he especially felt very missing in this? Especially since it would have been so easy to include him. Like I said, a lot of people didn't show up this year, and that's very disappointing, but Baizhu especially felt almost deliberately left out. It's weirder that he wasn't included in at least a scene. Clearly the reason he wasn't here is because he's busy in Chenyu Vale helping all the drowning victims, because if Fontaine flooded that much, there were waterfalls between Fontaine and Chenyu Vale. Chenyu Vale is lower than, parts of Chenyu Vale are lower than parts of Fontaine. It flooded, for crying out loud. And most importantly, there is simply no excuse to have Navia in Chenyu Vale before Baizhu. I don't care that Baizhu was not the first person there, but Navia beat him to it. I am personally offended by that alone.